Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. We respectfully advise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that this podcast contains the name of a deceased Aboriginal person. Additionally, some historical quotes include language that may be offensive. The Newcastle Family History Society does not condone such language. In the early decades of the Hunter Valley, bushrangers were not just outlaws. They were products of a restless and unequal society, shaped by hardship, opportunity and resistance. In this final episode of Bushrangers in the Hunter Valley, we follow the stories of the notorious Jewboy Gang and their enigmatic leader, Edward Davis, a figure remembered as much for his restraint as for his crimes. We then turn to the enduring legend of Frederick Ward, the so-called gentleman bushranger, whose reputation would eclipse those who came before him. And alongside him stands a remarkable woman, too often left in the margins, Ann Bugg, a skilled horsewoman, guide and strategist, whose role challenges the myths of bushranging itself.
Despite the shooting of Patrick Riley, the transportation of the remaining members of Jacob's Irish Brigade to Norfolk Island, the hangings of the Castle Forbes gang, and intensified pursuit by authorities, including the newly deployed mounted police, bushranging persisted in the Hunter Valley. Around 1839, yet another bushranger gang began raiding across the Hunter. On November 10, 1840, Edward Davis joined the bushrangers John Marshall and John Shea. The gang, now including Davis, roamed in areas including Maitland, Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Wollombi, Dungog, Musselbrook and Scone. From 1840, the gang leader is mostly recorded as being Edward, or Teddy, the Jewboy, Davis, and the gang became known as the Jewboy Gang. Edward Davis is the only known and recorded Jewish person who was a member of a bushranger gang. So, what is known about Edward Teddy Davis, the Jewboy? The proceedings of the Old Bailey online entry for April 5th, 1832 records some of Davis's basic details. Age 16. Sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing on the 28th of February, 1 wooden till valued 2 shillings and 5 shillings in copper money. Then the convict indents of 1833 note the following details. Age 18. Reads and writes. Jew. Stable hand from Gravesend. Tried 5th of April 1832 at Middlesex and sentenced to 7 years transportation for robbing a till. 4 foot 11.5 inches, complexion being dark, ruddy and much freckled, dark brown, nearly black hair and hazel eyes. Nose large, scar over left eyebrow. And tattoos. MJDRN inside the lower left arm. EDHDM, love and an anchor, lower left arm. 5 blue dots betwixt thumb and forefinger of the left hand. His chivalrous behaviour, together with his unique physical appearance — he was much shorter than the average for that time — his distinctive tattoos and his age gained him recognition by witnesses and resulted in the name by which the gang was commonly called. The gang was known to treat victims with politeness, refrain from harming women and children, avoid gratuitous violence, and ordered by their leader to not kill anyone. The gang was also known to give food, clothes, or stolen goods to the poor, which earned them a degree of local sympathy. So the gang was well known, and some settlers and assigned servants recognized and perhaps helped them. Based on general historical information and to add a visual touch to this account, we include the following exchange. In a Hunter Valley hut near their hideout in Pilcher's Mountain, south of Dungog, after enjoying the comforts of a home-cooked meal, and sitting comfortably around the table, we can suggest that a member of the gang, conspicuous for his tattoos, began the following postprandial tale.
There was this gentleman who told everyone that he was quite famous in London. He was of the gentry, but as the youngest son, and therefore without a major inheritance, he had begun a more adventurous life as a forger of banknotes, letters of introduction, requests for stores and land, that kind of thing. According to him, he now craved adventure in the colony and notoriety as a member of a successful gang of brothers. This finely dressed man approached one of our humble homes. I say home, but it was more of a cave. He had found us and appeared without a gun that could be seen. Perhaps he had a small pistol hidden in his yellow satin waistcoat, nothing that couldn't be handled. We had already been approached by others who had begged to join our group, some from other gangs, desperate runaways from as far as Port Macquarie, and general fortune hunters.
Said the short, dark man.
I would be most honoured to join your group, or perhaps you would prefer the term gang. And I am quite certain that I can be of great assistance to you in what you might say is your work,
he said to us at our camp that evening.
He was always writing in his little notebook. I tried to read it, but he always had it.
Said another of them, adding to the story.
He wanted to be the leader of a gang. He wasn't the only cove who wanted to make himself famous, one way or another.
He was more interested in cutting a dashing figure than anything. He wore the best leather boots, all sorts of coloured ribbons, not pink like ours, and the biggest black hat.
Said another, causing laughter in the room at the memory. Australian highwaymen and later women adopted a facsimile of the costumes of their countrymen back home. The bushrangers were flamboyant in their dress and in their behaviour. They wore shiny black leather riding boots, tight white pants like the soldiers, black white-brimmed hats with feathers from the local birds, silk scarves, and the ribbons they took from the clothing stores that they robbed. From those that they had held up at gunpoint, they also took watches, rings, silver coins, and anything they could carry away. The dark, long-haired man, who appeared to be their leader, went on.
He was not a man to be trusted. He had no interest in justice. He wanted to be the leader, and he thought it was an easy way to make money and tell his story as a hero. Eventually, we gave him the heave-ho. 2 of us followed him to put the fear of God into him so he wouldn't return. We heard that he went back to Sydney. Not like us, he could always go back. He had no heart and no interest in our cause.
After their supper and conversation, taking with them food, spirits, and blankets, the gang left quietly, with no lasting ill feeling on either side, and so they added to their reputation as gentlemen. The Jewboy Gang was said to have sworn to the policy that the direct threat to their own lives and liberty was the only reason for taking a life. They had survived on this land with the help from settlers and servants. Jane Wilson, in the Australian Dictionary of Biography, records the following. The Jewboy Gang operated in northern New South Wales around Maitland in 1839 to 1840. The makeup of the gang appears to have varied from time to time, and its actual existence prior to August 1840 has recently been questioned. But there's no doubt it committed some daring raids on settler properties in August to December 1840. This gang was known for its gaudy attire and were reported at one time as wearing broad-rimmed manila hats turned up in the front with abundance of broad pink ribbons, satin neckcloths, splendid brooches. All of them had rings and watches. The bridles of their horses were also decorated with a profusion of pink ribbons. There appears to have been some conflict between the members of this gang in relation to violence, but in any event, their reign ended with a shootout. How did this happen, given their pledge to avoid killing? In Scone, Teddy, the Jewboy Davis, Everett and Glanville had made themselves comfortable in the St Alban Arms, while Marshall, Shea, Chitty and an unknown 7th man went to the nearby store for supplies. Unfortunately for everyone, the young recent arrival John Graham ran to escape from their attempt to rob his employer in Thomas Dangar's store in Scone. As he ran away to raise the alarm, he was shot and killed by Shay. The Jewboy Gang regrouped and fled to one of their hiding places near Mararandai. 6 of them were finally captured after a brutal gun battle at Doughboy Hollow and were committed for trial on February 24, 1841. On February 25, 1841, George Wilkinson, alias Edward Davis, together with Shay and others, were indicted for being present, aiding and abetting, and assisting the murder of the scone shop assistant, John Graham. Shay, the shooter, was indicted for murder. All were sentenced to death by Chief Justice Sir James Dowling and were hanged on March 16, 1841. Usually, hanged prisoners were interred in the unconsecrated ground of Darlinghurst Jail. However, evidence from cemetery records and Jewish community records from 1841 suggests that Eddie Davis was buried in the Jewish section of Devonshire Street Cemetery in Sydney after his execution. Given that Davis was born around 1816 in East London, came from a working-class Jewish family, and arrived among an overwhelmingly Ashkenazi convict cohort, it is almost certain that he was Ashkenazi in background, as was the majority of the Jewish community in Sydney at that time. It would seem that he had contacted his religious fellows for help and consideration. As the Australasian Chronicle, 18th of March 1841, states, on Tuesday morning, the 6 bushrangers, James Everett, Robert Chitty, John Marshall, Richard Glanville, John Shay, and Edward Davis, who were convicted at the last criminal sittings of the willful murder of John Graham at Scone on the 21st of December last, all paid the forfeit of their lives by expiating their offences on the scaffold. An immense crowd was collected to witness the last awful scene of these men's career. They all appeared to be deeply impressed with a full sense of their awful situation and paid the greatest attention to the instruction and prayers of their spiritual attendants. After about 10 minutes spent in devotion, they arose and ascended the steps to the gallows. A few minutes more were spent in devotion, and then the ropes were adjusted and the caps drawn over their faces. It is to be hoped that awful example which has been made of them will deter others. That didn't happen. Jacob's Irish Brigade, the Castle Forbes rioters, and later the Jewboy Gang had escaped from local settlements and typically ranged in our area until caught and punished. However, there were other bushrangers from further afield whose presence was also significant in the Hunter Valley. As stated previously, the leader of the Jewboy Gang, Eddie Davis, was known for politeness, avoidance of unnecessary violence, and a certain gallantry. Curiously, another bushranger, Frederick Ward, also known as Captain Thunderbolt, was known for exactly those characteristics. Yet, Captain Thunderbolt's status in folklore is much higher and extensively publicised than those who went before him. Captain Thunderbolt robbed mailmen, travellers, inns, stores and stations across much of northern New South Wales, from the Hunter Valley north to Queensland, and from Tamworth nearly as far west as Burke, for roughly 6.5 years, from 1863 to 1870. As Captain Thunderbolt was well known for his non-violent, property-focused robberies, he became known as the Gentleman Bushranger, who famously escaped from the jail on Cockatoo Island by swimming through shark-infested waters to safety. He was the son of convicts, and as such, he and his gang were prime representatives of the second wave of Australian bushranging, defined by post-convict era outlaws who rode fast horses, targeted rural roads, and became folk heroes through press coverage, which formed popular memory. Frederick Ward worked as a station hand, stockman, and horsebreaker in the Hunter and New England districts long before his conviction. He's described as a capable rider, an exceptional breaker and trainer of young horses, and skilled in handling difficult or spirited animals. These special skills were the reason he was employed on pastoral stations and also why he became involved in the horse-stealing ring that led to his 1856 conviction. As Captain Thunderbolt, he was known to show his guns rather than brandish them or discharge them. Instead, he relied on superior horseflesh to make good his getaway. He is credited with having stolen or commandeered over 40 thoroughbred racehorses in his time on the road. He also stole well-bred station horses and well-conditioned remounts. While Captain Thunderbolt's legend is most strongly tied to Uralla and New England, he spent a significant time in the Hunter, especially the Upper Hunter districts of Scone, Murrurundi, and Musselbrook. This area was where he and a series of temporary accomplices conducted raids and had hideouts. In addition, his partner, the famous bushranger Ann Bugg, was from that area, and they are known to have visited there. Through Ann Bugg, her family and connections, Thunderbolt was very familiar with the Hunter Valley. Who was this exceptional female Australian bushranger, Ann Bugg? The following comes from her biographical entry in Wikipedia. Ann Bugg, 7th of May 1834 to the 22nd of April 1905, was a Worimi bushranger. She was an expert horse rider and bush navigator. In 1833, Ann's father established a relationship with an Aboriginal woman he called Charlotte, and from this union was born Ann and her 7 siblings. Ann and her brother John were baptized by Reverend William Cowper on the 24th of February 1839. The following day, their father headed to Sydney with them, where they were to be educated. Their mother and father had petitioned their employer, Colonel Henry de Merrick, to help find a school for them to, and I quote, elevate them above the barbarism of her tribe. Ann attended school in Sydney, where she learnt literacy, numeracy, and domestic skills before returning to Berwick when she was around 10 years of age. Who was this helpful estate owner, Colonel Henry de Merrick, mentioned above? St Heliers, which was the name of Henry de Merrick's estate near Musselbrook, was one of the best regulated estates in the colony, according to John Dunmore Lang in An Historical and Statistical Account of New South Wales, 1852. Quote, the law on his estate is the law of kindness, and incitement to industry and good conduct are rewards, not punishments. The convict labourers reside in whitewashed cottages, each having a little garden in front. Prizes are awarded to those who keep their cottages in the best order. The result of such a system is just what might be expected. The men are sober, industrious, and contented. James Backhouse added further praise, pointing out the advantages of de Merrick's system of classifying the single men and placing the married men with their wives and families. This landowner stands in stark contrast to various others, including James Moody of Castle Forbes. The Wikipedia entry cited above covers Ann Bugg's early years, until she became recognised as Captain Thunderbolt's eyes and ears, helping to keep them safe from the troopers. She acted as his scout, visiting towns to find out if the troopers were around. However, there's no evidence to suggest that she accompanied him during his robberies, although the community at large believed that she did. Primarily, she looked after their bush camps, hamstringing cattle, and foraging for food for Captain Thunderbolt and their accomplices. Several reports describe her as looking like a young man wearing knee-length Wellington boots, moleskin trousers, a Crimean shirt, a monkey jacket, and a cabbage tree hat, the dress of the flash stockmen of the day, and at a time when women did not wear men's clothing. Also, she rode astride, as did a man, and not side-saddle, as was customary for women in those days. She was proud of her association with Ward, and on several occasions referred to herself as the captain's lady. If history books mention Ann Bugg at all, she's simply described as the partner of Captain Thunderbolt. However, Ann Bugg was exceptional as a literate and capable First Nations woman and has every claim to being just as iconic as her male partner. There is an ABC News report from the 16th of November 2019 by Michael Delaney for Fierce Girls, entitled Aboriginal Bushranger Who Fought the Police but Was Dropped from Australian Folklore, which gives details of her life and times. Mary Ann's story marks her as an uncommon woman of her time. Though many relationships between settlers and Indigenous people on the frontier were violent and unequal, her parents' union was long-term and consensual. In 1860, she met Thunderbolt, whose real name was Fred Ward. Before his capture in 1870, she acted as his scout, informer, lover, and confidant, and bore him 3 children. Thunderbolt is recognized for having the longest bushranging career in New South Wales, but it's unlikely he would have survived for so long without Mary Ann's help. She taught the illiterate Thunderbolt to read. She helped provide food and shelter, spread false information to help him stay ahead of the authorities, and nursed him back to health after he was shot. What happened in the colony regarding bushrangers had lasting effects on our history. The microcosm of the Hunter Valley in the first half of the 19th century illustrates the cause and effect of the bushranging phenomenon, which has become the subject of scholarship analysis in many books, songs, and legends. Though the bushrangers did not leave progeny in the Hunter Valley, they did leave a lasting impression. This brings us to the end of my series from the Newcastle Family History Society on bushrangers in the Hunter Valley, in which we began with the imperial context of prisoners in Britain and the colony. We then focused on specific backgrounds, socio-religious context, and fates of 3 bushranger gangs and settlers, their individual lives, trials, executions, and government inquiries. We've noted the historical relationship between the British government and their official representatives, such as Governor Burke, and large landowners and magistrates, such as James Moody. We included responses by local emancipists and settlers, such as Molly Morgan, historical press reports, and their possible interactions. We explored a later bushranger gang, the Jewboy Gang, and an iconic representative of the second wave of bushranging in the Hunter Valley, Captain Thunderbolt. We also highlighted the exceptional, proud Worimi woman, Ann Bugg, who, after Thunderbolt's death, continued to live a long and productive life. This series has focused on bushrangers in the Hunter Valley, but it has only traced some footsteps through a far larger and more complex landscape. Many other forces shaping the valley in the first decades of the 19th century have necessarily remained beyond our reach. The spread of Enlightenment ideas and their uneven influence in Australia, the leadership and resistance of First Nations people in the escalating frontier wars, the power of the institutions such as the Australian Agricultural Company, the work of Reverend Threlkeld at Newcastle and Lake Macquarie, and the vital, often under-recorded contributions of women to the region's history. Elsewhere, in the books, archives, and websites referenced throughout this series, the Hunter Valley can be explored through many other lives and perspectives. First Nations leaders, female convicts, emancipists, settlers, entrepreneurs, absentee landlords, governors, commandants, artists, bushrangers, and humanitarians such as Carolyn Chisholm. In the Newcastle Family History Society's podcast, Birds of a Feather, we hear the voices of artists, engravers, botanists, and writers who were witnesses to the beginning of colonial life in the Hunter Valley before moving on. And move on they did. Governors, commandants, soldiers, and administrators were posted elsewhere. Architects, surveyors, and emancipists were granted land, sold it, and returned to Sydney or to Britain. Convicts who gained their freedom and could afford their passage often left as well. The valley was, for many, a place of transit rather than settlement. For some, however, this was where the struggle ended. The first bushrangers lived out their last, desperate bids for freedom here. Others carried their experiences away in memory, in print, or in images etched into lithographs, journals, and paintings, before they moved or were moved on. Whether they stayed briefly or for a lifetime, all of them left marks on the Hunter Valley. Together they shaped its politics, its anxieties, its myths, and its sense of possibility. Bushrangers were part of that story, not apart from it, and through them we glimpse a society in the making, restless, contested, and still to this day, very much unfinished.
From the first desperate escapes to the rise of legendary figures like Captain Thunderbolt, the story of bushranging in the Hunter Valley reveals far more than crime. It reflects a society in flux, shaped by convicts, settlers, First Nations peoples, and those who lived between the lines of law and survival. Figures like Edward Davis and Ann Bugg remind us that history is rarely simple. It is layered with contradiction, resilience, and voices that are still being rediscovered. This series has followed just a handful of these stories, and we extend our thanks to Society member Narelle Austin for her research and creativity in bringing them to life. Many more stories remain, waiting in archives, records, and family histories. If you're inspired to explore further, you'll find more through our other podcasts, including Felonious Females, Birds of a Feather, and Notable Novocastrians, along with a range of publications available through our online shop. We hope you've enjoyed listening to Bushrangers in the Hunter Valley on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.